They captured 156 of the most advanced submarines on Earth, and then they erased them. You'd think they'd study them, split them up, maybe even reuse them. But instead, the Allies made one decision nobody saw coming, and after that, nothing was left. Between November 1945 and February 1946, the Royal Navy destroyed 116 U-boats in Operation Deadlight. It was more than a military operation. It was a political ploy to prevent another was before it could start. Was Operation Deadlight a success? Or was this beginning of the Cold War arms race? The world was still recovering from the devastation of World War II, but the peace was already unraveling. Because if the Allies couldn't agree on how to divide 156 submarines, the Cold War would start right there in 1945 over who got the boats. In the summer of 1945, the wartime alliance was already fracturing. The United States wanted the U-boats for study. Britain saw intelligence value. The Soviet Union demanded its share. And among the surrendered fleet were Type XXI Elektroboats, submarines with revolutionary battery systems and streamlined hulls that could operate almost entirely underwater. They represented the future, and everyone knew it. But that wasn't the worst part. The British government had been planning since 1944 for this exact problem. Their solution was radical: destroy nearly all of the U-boats before anyone could fight over them. So how do you get three rival powers to agree to destroy the most valuable naval technology on Earth? Because without agreement, each nation takes what it wants, the others panic and build more, and you've got an arms race on your hands. In August 1945, Britain, the United States, and the Soviet Union signed a tripartite agreement. Each nation would receive exactly 10 U-boats for examination, equal shares. What would happen to the remaining 116 submarines? They would be sunk in deep water, permanently off the table. It was brilliant political theater disguised as garbage disposal. Here's how it worked. Give everyone the same research quota so nobody feels cheated. Set a hard deadline, February 15, 1946, so there's no time to renegotiate. And sink everything else in water deeper than 100 meters so it can't be salvaged later. The problem was simple on paper. The execution would be anything but. What nobody accounted for was this. By the time the agreement was signed, the submarines were already falling apart. And that turned a controlled disposal operation into a race against time. Through the autumn of 1945, condemned U-boats were gathered at two staging ports. Loch Ryan in Scotland held 86. Lisa Halley in Northern Ireland held 30 more. They sat there for months, moored in exposed waters, waiting. Many had been at sea without maintenance. Their ballast tanks leaked, their engines seized, rust weakened their pressure hulls. The submarines that once prowled the Atlantic were now barely seaworthy, and it was about to get even worse. Winter was coming. Racing against the clock, the Royal Navy proposed a solution: tow them anyway. Unarmed, unstable, rusting wrecks hauled 130 miles into the North Atlantic through winter storms. What could go wrong? And this is where everything changed. On November 27, 1945, the Royal Navy began the first tow. Within hours, they knew the plan wouldn't work, because the North Atlantic in winter doesn't care about your deadlines. Storms broke tow cables, waves battered weakened hulls. Boats that were supposed to reach deep water began sinking en route, dragged down by structural failure. Of the 116 U-boats slated for destruction, only about half reached the intended scuttling zones. 56 vessels foundered under tow. The carefully planned demolition charge method, designed for controlled sinkings, worked only twice. So what do you do when your disposal plan is sinking faster than the submarines? You improvise. Naval gunfire became the default. Royal Navy destroyers circled the condemned boats and opened fire at close range, punching shells through hulls already weakened by rust and seawater. Some submarines went down quickly. Others took dozens of rounds before finally sinking beneath the surface. 13 boats were designated for aerial attack in Zone ZZ. RAF Coastal Command and Fleet Air Arm Crews used them for live fire practice, dropping bombs and firing rockets until the hulks disappeared. 7 more were sunk by British submarines firing torpedoes, giving crews target practice they'd never had during the actual war. The operation became a weapons test disguised as a burial, each sinking serving double duty as both disposal and training. But the chaos had a rhythm. The operation unfolded in 3 distinct waves. From November 27th to December 30th, 1945, the Royal Navy eliminated 86 boats towed from Loch Ryan. From December 29th, 1945 to January 9th, 1946, they sank 28 boats from Lisa Halley. The final 2 arrivals, U-975 and U-3514, were destroyed in February, just days before the deadline. U-3514 was sunk using ship guns and depth charges, a multi-method attack that ensured it went down quickly. On February 7, 1946, U-2511, a fully operational Type XXI Elektroboat, became the last vessel scuttled under Operation Deadlight. The Royal Navy had met its mandate, but the execution didn't go as planned, and then the story took a darker turn. Because while the Allies were destroying the fleet, something else was happening on the other side of the Iron Curtain. Remember why they were sinking these boats in the first place? To prevent a Cold War arms race by keeping the technology away from rivals. What's coming next is the part that makes the whole operation look pointless. Because the Soviets didn't need to fight over the wrecks. They had their 10 research boats, and they knew exactly what to do with them. While 116 boats were sinking in the Atlantic, 30 survived. And this is where the plan to prevent proliferation completely failed. Because it turns out you can't bury an idea by sinking the ships that carried it. The tripartite agreement gave each Allied power 10 submarines. The most sought after being the Type XXI Elektroboats, with its revolutionary designs, advanced batteries, streamlined hulls, and snorkel systems. Soviet shipyards dissected the Type XXI hulls plate by plate, replicating everything. The result was the Whiskey-class submarine, a direct copy of German wartime engineering. The same technology the Allies tried to bury now powered a rival fleet. So if the Soviets got the technology anyway, what was the point of sinking the other 116 boats? You can't stop technology transfer by destroying 80% of the examples when the other 20% are sitting in your rival shipyards being reverse engineered. Deadlight eliminated the bargaining chips, but it couldn't eliminate the blueprints. The United States used its captured boats for weapons testing, including atomic trials during Operation Crossroads. U-2513, a Type 21, was operated for evaluation and finally sunk on October 7, 1951. Britain used retained boats for trials before scrapping them. A handful survived into the museum age. U-995 was transferred to Norway in 1948, served briefly, and was eventually returned to Germany in 1965. Today, it rests at Le Beau, near Kiel, preserved as a museum ship. U-505, captured intact in June 1944, was eventually displayed at the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago. Only 4 U-boats from the war survive as museum pieces. The rest lie on the seabed, and here's what nobody tells you about that. Operation Deadlight succeeded at exactly one thing. It prevented an immediate political crisis in 1945 by removing the submarines from negotiation. But it failed at everything else. The technology spread anyway. The Soviets built their entire post-war submarine fleet from the designs they were allowed to keep. Half the fleet sank in the wrong places, creating a dispersed underwater graveyard that's still poorly mapped 80 years later. The wrecks themselves became a new problem in the 1990s, when salvage companies targeted them for low background steel, creating diplomatic disputes that continue even today. The Cold War arms race didn't begin with nuclear submarines in the 1950s. It began in 1945 with captured German boats that the Allies thought they were burying forever. But that's not the crazy part. because decades later, the graveyard of U-boats would be explored, revealing not everything was as it seemed. Between 2001 and 2003, a marine archaeologist went looking for the wrecks. And what he found proved the operation was even more chaotic than anyone knew. The archaeologist's team surveyed roughly 14 wrecks using sonar and deep-sea photography. In a concentrated 2-week effort, they positively identified only about 10 U-boats, including U-2511, the last boat scuttled under Deadlight. The exact locations and identities of more than 100 Deadlight wrecks remain unknown. The half that foundered undertow are especially hard to track because those losses were unplanned and weather-driven. And then it gets worse. Expeditions searching for Operation Deadlight targets sometimes find tragedy instead. In 2007, a professional diver died during filming for a salvage project. The depths, the deteriorating hulls, and the cold Atlantic make the wrecks dangerous even for experienced teams. What was supposed to be a controlled disposal became an archaeological puzzle that may never be solved. But this next part changes the whole story. The operation designed to erase the U-boat fleet actually preserved it, just in the worst possible way. Scattered, untracked, and lethal. The Allies eliminated 116 submarines to prevent a crisis. But the plan failed operationally. Half sank accidentally. The technology spread to rivals anyway, and the wrecks left behind created problems that persist into the 21st century. Operation Deadlight didn't bury the U-boat threat. It just scattered it across the Atlantic, in the dark and out of reach, and the Cold War took the designs anyway. Then the ocean closed over them, and it was over.